been visiting the Middle East for some time. And his question is, how should we approach the question of cyber protection, the complexity of it from the ground up, and how to make the average citizen more aware and thus more resilient? So how can we empower and make sure that the average citizen actually takes these particular issues seriously?
I can start. I'll say that I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the government campaigns around COVID. And I think that at least the government in Israel, they did two things right. One is to explain why people need to wear a mask and what's the physiology, what's the risk in the disease, but also they did an entire campaign around people who've been hurt or who've been infected, and them telling their own stories on how they were infected and what the side effects were and how bad they feel, months after. And I think that this combination of giving the science, but then also the emotion and understanding and listening to people talk about it, it kind of, it connects, and I think that it stays and gets one to remember and to try to avoid something. And if we were to do the same with cyber risks, first of all, explaining and giving examples to what the risks are, what does an attack look like, but then also give personal stories of both organizations, companies, but also individuals who've been hurt by a cyber attack. This combination could really rest and could really give people the incentive to learn more about this subject and to think twice before clicking a link in an email. So that's my 2 cents.
I don't think there's anything that individual citizens need to do. I think we have a problem of how we as societies value these things. And of course, that starts with the voters and the citizens having that belief and buy-in that that's important. But like so many abstract cybersecurity issues, this is out of sight, out of mind. When gas disappears in a hydrocarbon economy, people notice that. My prediction for the next one is going to be the coffee supply chain. Because if fuel is powering our economies, coffee's what's powering people.
Brian, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing for now.
All right, we have another question. Could you elaborate more, especially on the link between Iran and proxies? So some of the joint campaigns that have been seen in the Middle East between Iran and other countries.
Yeah, glad to jump in here, Chris. And given I was talking quite a bit about some of Iranian malicious activity. Certainly the question here, as implied, is right? That the Iran's cooperation with partners and proxies like the Houthis, Hezbollah, groups in Palestinian militant groups makes attribution more difficult, period. And particularly from the private sector side. What I would say in terms of the question of how do we draw these links, the way we do it at Microsoft involves, it's based on tooling, infrastructure, capabilities, techniques, and victims, right? For those heavily involved in the field, no surprise there. And I think a big part of it's also a lot, in terms of what my team does at Microsoft and Digital Security Unit, is focus in particular on some of the victims and drawing connections there and the alignment with the goals of regimes, right? Whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world. And in the case of some of the ransomware attacks we were talking about earlier, I'll just make one last point in some of those links, right? The ransomware attacks that we saw conducted by what we were assessing are Iranian linked actors against Israel, it was a couple bins of sectors. One, there was a large set of attacks on maritime logistics. And then there was another set of attacks on auto, car involved industries, right? There's a set of attacks on a large car insurance company and then an auto financing company. In terms of the maritime logistics, we saw attacks both several companies late last year and then another Veritas Logistics in late April. And there does seem to be an Iranian tie in there, in the sense that at the same time that these cyber attacks are going on, there's several reports that are continually coming out of this ongoing covert war between Iran and Israel that's playing out in the maritime domain. And so it appears as if these attacks are just one pillar of that set of operations that the Iranian regime is conducting to retaliate against Israel for in that domain, for Iran's inability to ship some of its oil to Syria. And then on the auto industry, that's a little bit less clear, but that could be an attempt by the Iranians to signal that they view Israel as going along with U.S.-led sanctions that have had such an impact on the Iranian auto industry.
Okay. Another question, which is a bit near and dear to my heart, is do you think that the new Abraham Peace Accords, which has been heavily supported by the Emiratis in UAE, will change the cyber balance of power in the Middle East and have any impact on the protection of critical infrastructure in UAE?
I'll jump into part of that. So balance of power, I think, is not the right way, I think, to phrase it with cyber, because it's not like one side clearly wins and one side clearly loses. I think it's kind of like we all keep losing together, and we keep poking each other in the eyes with it. So in terms of that balance of power, because it's so offensively driven, it's primarily everybody can throw punches and nobody can take them. The Israelis clearly have a world-class offensive cyber capability. And as Maya shared during the panel, they also have that really cool kind of 911 approach to response, which is, I think, an interesting model that I'd love to hear more about in a future case study about how that plays out. I think a lot of people will be very interested in that. Certainly, the level of cooperation, all of the Mideast conferences and panels that I've been a part of in the last year, everybody really believes in the value of cooperation in general in that community, because there's so much at stake, no pun intended, with them all being in the same sandbox.
I can throw out one quick comment on this. What I would just say is, I hope it does level the playing field, at least from the defense perspective, right? I hope that, given the UAE, given Iran's adversaries in the region have faced so many cyber attacks from Iran, I do hope that the Israelis can help the Gulf countries improve their defenses to be able to better defend against future Iranian attacks.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it will, maybe not today, but definitely tomorrow. I believe it was December of last year, maybe November, we were requested at the Middle East Institute Cyber Program to help draft the Abraham Cyber Peace Accords, to list certain things such as mutual assistance in case one of the accord signatories came under attack, not to attack each other's critical infrastructure, a way to clear up misunderstandings with a symbolic kind of red phone that we've seen in some of the old nuclear movies. And I think that's important because one of the challenges in the Middle East and around the world is we are all interconnected, and there really aren't any places left anymore where all of the telecom infrastructure is only in one country, or all of the CDNs are only in one country. So if an attack is coming from one particular country and it's transiting, and one of those countries is a signatory, then they could provide assistance by trying to block the traffic. Or if it's coming from inside their own country, let's say a particular supported group from a particular country, then they can try to halt that attack. And I think it would be beneficial to the entire region, as well as other North African countries who have signed on, and the one European country, Kosovo, to recognize that you can assist each other, but also be able to do technology transfers where applicable and where appropriate. So how do you think the Iran-China 25-year cooperation program will impact Iran's cyber capabilities?
I can refer and say that I think that Chinese APTs, Chinese nation state attacks, and the Iranian ones could not be less similar to one another. So attacks coming out of China are usually advanced persistent threats, in the sense that they use exploits and exploits to different vulnerabilities, sometimes to zero-day vulnerabilities. Checkpoint Research has released a paper about them also using tools coming out of the NSA. Before the leak of the NSA tools, they had these tools and used them. So these are really some advanced attacks, while Iranian APTs are more on the P of the APT. They are persistent, not that advanced technology-wise. So they are usually very, I'd say, sophisticated phishing attacks. So they are more on the social engineering skills, really learning their targets. So they are very successful on that aspect, but less on the technology. So I don't see any of this collaboration or cooperation between China and Iran really showing up on the cyber threat landscape yet. Maybe it will in the future, but for now, I think that they are very, very different.
If I could build on that just a little bit. Yeah, I think the initial cooperation here will hopefully be limited to defenses, right? The agreement itself talked about intelligence sharing, improving of defenses, ICT. But I say that a bit skeptically and worried. Once Iranian actors and Chinese actors manage to start syncing up and develop a regular cadence of interacting with one another, what does that lead to, right? Maybe there are certain guidelines in place just for defensive, but how quickly does that leak over into offensive? So I think it's a space to watch down the road.
Something interesting that, of course, just came out in the news that might also be a part of this calculus. So the FSB in Russia reported a compromise on their government facilities. And of course, everybody pointed their fingers to the de facto natural culprits. Why wouldn't that be the Five Eyes? And it wasn't. It was the Chinese. And so we've seen China have an increasingly more aggressive cyber offensive posture. And I would wonder even if I'm their ally, how I would think about that.
Yeah, I believe that's why someone coined the term frenemy, Bryson.
And that ties to, I think, where we're hesitant here. I think the Chinese are also going to be hesitant to share anything more, like as Maya described, right? Iranian technical capabilities are not at the same level as the Chinese, but I think that the Chinese would be happy to share probably local targeting information, probably some mission packages. I think it might get to that level, but I don't think we're going to see any tools be exchanged other than ones that would probably be considered throwaway.
We have time for one last question. The Gulf states have ambitious programs to start and continue to run. smart cities whilst moving their populations, at least half, if not more, to urban centers. Do we have any thoughts on some of the risks of what could happen if smart city cybersecurity risks are not taken seriously in a cyber war kind of context?
Certainly, the more you connect and the more that that's tied to the physical environment, the more risk you've introduced. Clearly, they're thinking about that, and that's going to be a part of the very element of design of the smart city.
Definitely. So we're ending this. It was wonderful to have you all as panelists, including Nick, who could not join us. And we will start getting ready for the next panel. So thank you very much,